I still remember the way the rain used to fall on this old house. Soft, steady, like the ticking of time itself. You might even hear it now, if you listen closely. The wooden beams groan. The clock on the mantelpiece hesitates every few seconds, as if the house itself remembers everything I've tried so hard to forget. My name, my dear ones, is Margaret Ellington, but you can call me Granny Mags. Everyone does. I've lived in this house for more than 60 years. Through love, laughter, and the kind of betrayal that stains the soul more deeply than any wound. And tonight, for reasons I can't quite explain, I feel ready to tell the truth. Perhaps it's the storm outside, or perhaps it's because I can finally hear him again. In the creak of the floorboards, in the whisper of the curtains. Before I go on, my loves, if you're still listening, do me a small favor. Pour yourself a cup of tea, make yourself comfortable, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my little corner here. You'll need courage to stay with me through this tale. And when you're done listening, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It comforts an old woman to know who's out there. Now then, let's begin. It was 1956, a cold spring in Yorkshire. The kind of spring where the daffodils bloom too early and regret it. I was 23, and the world seemed full of promise. Or so I believed. My fingers were nimble back then, skilled with a needle and thread. My mother had taught me to sew when I was a girl. By 23, I'd become the most sought-after seamstress in the village, and people would come from miles away just to have me stitch their wedding gowns. That's how I met her. Eleanor, beautiful, radiant Eleanor. She came to me one misty morning, holding a letter of recommendation from the vicar's wife. She wanted me to sew her wedding dress. And not just any dress, but the one she'd dreamt of since childhood. Lace from France, silk from her mother's trousseau, and pearls. Tiny, perfect pearls, to be sewn by hand along the hem. From the moment she walked into my cottage, the air seemed to change. She was tall, graceful, and her voice had a softness that could charm the birds out of the trees. I remember thinking, if angels exist, they must look like her. We became friends almost instantly. She would visit every afternoon, bringing biscuits and stories about her fiancé, a young businessman named Edward Carter. She spoke of him as if he hung the moon itself. "He's different, Margaret," she would say, smiling shyly. "He truly sees me." But I had seen men like Edward before, charming, polite, and with eyes that wandered more than they should. Still, who was I to say anything? Love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? Weeks passed, and the dress began to take form. Every stitch I made felt like a promise, every thread a secret prayer. I worked by candlelight most nights, and sometimes, when the house was silent, I'd hear faint humming, a tune Eleanor had sung during her visits. It lingered in my head long after she'd gone. One evening, while working late, I pricked my finger. The blood seeped into the silk, staining it crimson. I gasped, not from pain, but from the odd feeling that came over me. You might call it superstition, my dear ones, but I've always believed that blood carries truth. I tried to wash the stain away, but a faint mark remained, like a warning. I told myself it was nothing, but fate, I've learned, has a way of speaking softly at first, and then screaming when you ignore it. Eleanor visited the next day, glowing with excitement. The wedding was only 2 weeks away. She showed me the ring Edward had given her, gold with a single emerald. As I admired it, I noticed something strange. The engraving inside the band read, "Forever M.E." I froze. My name, my initials, Margaret Ellington. I laughed nervously. "M.E., how curious. Those are my initials." She smiled unaware. "Oh, how funny." Edward said they stood for my everything. I remember my hands trembling as I folded the lace. My everything. The words sank like a stone in my chest. Because you see, Edward Carter wasn't a stranger to me. He had once been mine. Years earlier, before Eleanor ever stepped into my cottage, Edward and I had shared something. Or at least, I believed we had. He had promised me a future. Whispered dreams of a home together, children, laughter. But one morning, he vanished. No letter, no goodbye, just silence. I thought he was dead, until Eleanor showed me that ring. Do you see, my dear ones, how cruel fate can be? That night, I couldn't sleep. The house seemed to breathe. The floorboards sighing, the wind whispering through the cracks. I lit a candle and sat beside the half-finished gown, the blood-stained silk glimmering faintly. My reflection in the window looked like someone I no longer knew. I whispered, "You took my love, and now you bring him back, only to wound me again." But the dress, oh, that dress. It seemed almost alive. The fabric shimmered like moonlight, and I could have sworn I heard faint laughter. Not mine, not Eleanor's, but his, Edward's. In the days that followed, I tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. I smiled when Eleanor visited, stitched carefully, and listened to her endless stories about how Edward had rescued her from loneliness. Each word was a knife. When I told my mother, she frowned deeply. "Child," she said, "never sow your pain into another woman's joy. It'll curse the both of you." But what choice did I have? The wedding was in 5 days, and I couldn't break Eleanor's heart, even if it meant breaking my own. Still, something inside me changed that week. My stitches grew tighter, almost angry. The pearls I sewed along the hem felt cold, like drops of frozen tears, and every time I threaded the needle, the whisper in my ear grew louder. "He'll break her too." If you're still listening, my dear hearts, I hope you're feeling this the way I did. The ache, the confusion. Leave me a comment below if you've ever loved someone who betrayed you without a second thought. It's a strange comfort, knowing we're not alone in our heartbreak. Now, let me tell you what happened the night before the wedding. The night everything began to unravel. Eleanor arrived late, trembling and pale. Her eyes were red from crying. I sat her down by the fire, and she told me Edward hadn't come home. "He said he was meeting a business associate," she whispered. "But the hotel said he checked in alone. With a woman." My heart clenched. I wanted to tell her the truth, that this was who Edward was. But I stayed silent. Sometimes silence is the kindest form of cruelty. Instead, I comforted her. "You'll see, my dear, I lied. It's all a misunderstanding." That night, after she left, I went to the dress. The moonlight spilled through the window, silvering the lace. I ran my fingers along the hem, and suddenly I felt something inside the seam, a folded piece of paper, hidden deep within. I cut the thread carefully, and out slipped a note. In Edward's handwriting, it read, "Meet me at the cottage after midnight. We must talk before she finds out." But the date was written weeks before, and it wasn't addressed to Eleanor. It was addressed to me. The letter was old, yellowed, frayed, as if it had been trapped inside the fabric all this time. My hands shook as I realized the truth. The silk I used had come from Edward's mother's estate, the same cloth he had once sent me for our own engagement gown. The wedding dress was sewn with pieces of my own broken past, and perhaps something darker. But I think that's enough for tonight, my dear ones. If you want to hear what I found next, what really happened at that wedding, and what the dress did, make sure you like this story, share it with someone who loves a good mystery, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part, because trust me, the secrets that dress held could destroy more than just a marriage. Now tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'll be reading your comments as I make my tea and prepare to tell you what happened next. The morning of the wedding came like a bruise beneath the clouds, dark, heavy, and full of something unsaid. I woke before dawn, the house still half asleep, and sat at my sewing table, staring at the finished dress. It was beautiful, yes, breathtaking even, but it didn't feel pure. There was something in it, something I couldn't name. It hung in front of the window, pale and ghostly in the light, and as the breeze moved through the lace, it almost seemed to breathe. I know how that sounds. An old woman's imagination, perhaps. But if you'd been there, you'd have felt it too. The fabric wasn't still. It shifted ever so slightly, like a living thing that was listening. My mother came into the room quietly. "You haven't slept," she said softly. "No," I replied, staring at the hem where I'd found the letter. "Do you think a dress can carry the weight of memory?" She frowned, setting down a cup of tea beside me. "A dress is cloth, child. What you put into it, that's the part that haunts." I wanted to believe her, but something told me the haunting had already begun. By afternoon, the house was full of excitement. Eleanor arrived with her bridesmaids, all laughter and chatter, though I could tell she hadn't truly recovered from what she'd told me the night before. Her smile was fragile, the kind you wear to keep yourself from breaking. I helped her into the gown, fastening the tiny buttons one by one. As I worked, I caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked ethereal, glowing with the kind of beauty that only innocence brings. "Oh, Margaret," she whispered, looking at herself. "It's perfect. You've made me a dream." Her words stung more than she could ever know, because I realized, in that moment, that she was a dream. One built on lies, dressed in betrayal. As I adjusted the veil, she turned to me suddenly. "You'll come to the ceremony, won't you?" I hesitated. "If you want me there." "I insist," she said. "You're part of this story now." Her voice trembled a little as she said it, and I couldn't help but wonder, did she feel it too? That invisible heaviness between us, the kind that comes when two hearts are unknowingly tied to the same man. When they left for the church, I sat alone in the empty cottage. The silence was unbearable. I tried to busy myself with tidying up, folding scraps of fabric, sweeping the floor, but everywhere I looked, I saw memories. The old photograph of Edward and me by the piano, the pressed violet he'd given me, the small box that once held my engagement ring, long since pawned when he disappeared. I told myself not to go. I told myself it was better this way. But something, call it instinct, call it fate, wouldn't let me stay behind. So I put on my coat, pinned my hat, and walked through the drizzle to St. Mary's Church. When I arrived, the ceremony had just begun. The guests were seated, the vicar's voice echoing softly against the stone walls. I slipped into the back pew unnoticed, my eyes fixed on the couple at the altar. Edward stood tall, handsome as ever, his golden hair slicked back, his charm radiating effortlessly, and yet there was something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Eleanor looked radiant beside him, the gown glowing beneath the candlelight. But as she turned slightly, I saw it, the faint blood stain that refused to wash away. Right there, near the hem, a tiny blotch of crimson against the white silk. My breath caught. The vows began. "Do you, Edward Carter, take Eleanor Rose Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife?" He hesitated for just a second, but long enough for me to notice. Eleanor's hands tightened on his. The air in the church felt thick, like the calm before a storm. And then, as the vicar continued, a gust of wind burst through the doors. Candles flickered, a few went out, someone gasped. But Edward looked straight at me, his eyes locked onto mine across the church. It was only for a heartbeat, but in that moment, every memory between us surged back. The letters, the promises, the night he left. He blinked, shaken, as though seeing a ghost. When it was done and the guests poured out, I stayed behind. The air smelled of lilies and candle smoke. I walked down the aisle slowly, my footsteps echoing against the stone. The dress shimmered faintly under the stained glass, and as I approached Eleanor to offer my congratulations, I saw something move. Just beneath the fabric, the pearls on the hem trembled slightly, like raindrops quivering before a storm. "Margaret," Eleanor said, her smile returning. "You came." I nodded, forcing a smile. I wouldn't have missed it. Edward stood beside her, visibly uncomfortable. His polite grin didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Ellington," he said softly, almost formally, as if we were strangers. "Thank you for the beautiful gown." I wanted to strike him, to tear the mask off his perfect face. But instead, I whispered, "It fits her perfectly." Almost as if it was made for her destiny. His jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, nothing. Just that some dresses carry stories of their own," and I walked away. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was heavy. I turned one last time to see Eleanor and Edward stepping out of the church. She looked radiant. He looked haunted. The reception was held at the Whitmore estate, a sprawling mansion surrounded by blooming hydrangeas and laughter that sounded almost forced. I wasn't meant to attend, but Eleanor insisted again. "Come, Margaret," she said, taking my hands. "You brought beauty into this day. You belong here." So I went. Hours passed in a blur of champagne, music, and polite smiles. Edward avoided me, though I caught him watching me once or twice from across the room. Each time, he looked away quickly, as though the sight of me burned. Then came the first sign that something was wrong. During the first dance, as Eleanor twirled in her gown, one of the pearls from the hem snapped loose and rolled across the floor. Then another and another. Within moments, tiny pearls scattered everywhere, clinking like drops of rain. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor froze mid-spin, her face pale. The dress seemed to tighten around her waist, as if the fabric itself was contracting. "Margaret," she called, panic in her voice. "The dress, it's—" I rushed forward, but before I could reach her, she stumbled. The silk tore at the shoulder with a sound like a scream. Edward caught her just in time. "What's happening?" he demanded, glaring at me. I don't know." I lied, but deep down, I did. The blood, the letter, the memories, they had all found their way into the seams. And now, the dress was unraveling the truth neither of us had dared to face. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the laughter had faded, Eleanor came to my cottage again. The gown was torn, her face streaked with tears. "Margaret," she sobbed, "tell me the truth. What have you done?" I wanted to deny it, to tell her it was all coincidence. But as I looked at her, I saw it. The faint outline of Edward's initials still pressed into her skin, where the bodice had been too tight. M.E. My everything. "It's not me," I whispered. "It's him. It's always been him." She shook her head, backing away. "No, you knew. You knew, and you made this dress to punish me." Her voice broke. "You cursed my wedding." And before I could reach her, she fled into the rain. I never saw Eleanor again, not alive. Anyway, the next morning, they found her by the riverbank, her gown still clinging to her body, the pearls scattered in the mud, like tiny white eyes staring up at the heavens. Edward left the village soon after. Some said he went mad. Others said he drowned himself months later in the same river. As for me, I stayed here, in this house, with the remnants of that dress locked away in a chest upstairs. Sometimes, late at night, when the rain falls just like it did that morning, I still hear it, the soft sound of thread pulling tight, of fabric sighing, as if something or someone is still sewing. My dear ones, if you're still here with me, I hope your hearts can handle what comes next, because that wasn't the end. Oh no, it was only the beginning of what that wedding dress would do. If you're still listening, please like this story so I know you're here. Share it with someone who believes in fate and betrayal. And subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Trust me, the next part will make you question whether a soul can ever truly rest when love turns into vengeance. And before I go, tell me in the comments, Have you ever kept something from your past that refuses to stay silent? Because in my house, it's the dress that won't stop whispering. It's strange, isn't it, how time can crawl and yet vanish all at once. I blinked, and 20 years had slipped through my wrinkled hands, like the threads of a fraying spool. The year was 1974. Most of the village had changed. New shops, new families, but this old house remained exactly as it always had. Creaking, sighing, alive with the ghosts of yesterday. By then, I lived alone. My mother had long since passed, and the garden she'd tended had grown wild, ivy gripping the brick walls like green veins. The chest, that chest, still sat in the attic, locked and forgotten, or at least I pretended it was forgotten, because some nights, when the wind pressed against the windows, I'd hear the faint rustle of silk from up there, like something shifting, breathing, waiting. One morning, a knock came at my door. When I opened it, sunlight poured in, and behind it stood a young woman with chestnut hair and eyes far too curious for her own good. "Mrs. Ellington?" she asked politely. "I'm Charlotte Blythe. My fiancé and I just moved into the old Cartwright cottage down the lane. Everyone says you were once the best seamstress in Yorkshire." Her voice was so warm, so alive, that for a moment I forgot how to breathe. She reminded me of Eleanor, radiant and innocent in that same dangerous way. "I haven't sewn for years," I murmured. "Oh, please," she smiled. "I'm getting married in October, and I can't afford those London boutiques. I'd pay whatever you ask." I should have said no. I wanted to say no, but something inside me stirred. The same old pull of silk and memory. "All right," I heard myself whisper. "Come in, if you're listening, my dear hearts. You already know that every bad story begins with a moment of weakness. So, before we go further, do me one small favor. Tap that little like button so I know you're still here with me, and tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that same weakness, that urge to reopen an old wound just to see if it still hurts." Charlotte began visiting every week. She brought photographs of lace patterns, sketches of sleeves, and small boxes of fabric samples, but nothing pleased her. Until, one rainy afternoon, she wandered up the narrow stairs to the attic while I was brewing tea. "Mrs. Ellington?" she called. "What's in this old chest?" The teapot slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. I ran up those stairs faster than I had in years. "Don't touch that," I cried, my breath trembling. She stepped back, startled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean," but it was too late. The lock on the chest had rusted through years ago, and the lid had already lifted. Inside, the gown lay folded neatly, its silk yellowed with age, its lace stiff and fragile. Yet, it still shimmered faintly in the dim light. Charlotte gasped. "It's beautiful. Is it yours?" I wanted to lie, but the words tangled in my throat. "It belonged to someone I once knew," I said. She ran her fingers along the pearls, and one of them slipped loose, rolling across the floor just as it had all those years ago. "Oh," she laughed softly. "It's still perfect. Could I have this dress? I could alter it, make it mine." Her words hit me like a chill. "No," I said firmly. "That dress is not meant to be worn again." She looked puzzled. "But it's too lovely to waste." I closed the lid and turned the key. Though my hands trembled so violently, the key nearly broke. "Some things," I said, "are beautiful because they're buried." She left soon after, disappointed but polite. I told myself that would be the end of it. But the next week, I heard her laughter again outside my gate. She waved, carrying a parcel. "I've been thinking about that gown," she said. "Would you at least let me look at it once more? I dreamt about it last night. It was glowing. My stomach turned. Dreams are dangerous things, child." That night, I couldn't sleep. I climbed to the attic to make sure the chest was still locked. The key was where I'd left it, but the lid was slightly ajar. And inside, the dress was gone. I nearly screamed. Then, through the small attic window, I saw Charlotte outside in the moonlight, twirling in that cursed silk. The gown, though decades old, fit her perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. Her laughter echoed through the garden, and for one terrible second, I thought I saw someone standing behind her in the shadows. Tall, male, his outline unmistakable. Edward. I blinked, and he was gone. I ran outside barefoot, the gravel cutting my feet. "Charlotte," I cried, "take it off. Please." She stopped spinning and stared at me, confused. "Mrs. Ellington, are you all right?" The gown shimmered under the moonlight, the pearls glowing faintly, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw Eleanor's face reflected in the fabric, eyes wide, lips trembling, whispering something I couldn't hear. "Where did you get it?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "It was hanging on my door when I got home," she said. "I thought you—" "I didn't," I shouted. The next morning, I found the gown neatly folded again in the chest, spotless, as if nothing had happened. But Charlotte stopped visiting, and a week later, her mother came to my door in tears. "Charlotte's fallen ill," she said. "Fever, nightmares. She keeps mumbling about a river, about pearls." My knees nearly gave out. That night I went to her cottage. Charlotte lay pale and sweating, whispering in her sleep. Her hands clutched the bedsheets, as though holding on to something unseen. And on her wrist, 3 small indentations, like the bite of a needle. I sat beside her trembling. "Eleanor," I whispered into the dark, "if you're here, let her go." The candle flickered. Somewhere in the corner, the faint rustle of silk answered. My dear ones, if you're still listening this far, thank you, truly. These memories are heavy, and sometimes it helps to know someone out there is hearing them. If you'd like me to go on, to tell you what happened when I tried to destroy that cursed dress, please subscribe and stay with me for part 2, chunk 2, because in that next chapter, you'll learn what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, and what price a soul must pay to finally set love and guilt free. Now before you go, tell me below where you're listening from tonight. Sometimes, when I read your words, it makes the silence in this house a little less lonely. I still remember the smell of that night, damp wood, smoke, and the faint sweetness of lavender drifting from Charlotte's cottage window. She hadn't woken all day. I could feel the house itself holding its breath, waiting for me to act. I lit a lantern and climbed to the attic. The chest waited in the corner like a sleeping beast. My hands shook as I opened it. The hinges groaned in protest. There it was, the gown, untouched, unwrinkled, folded as if some invisible hand had just pressed it flat. For a moment, I thought I heard whispering beneath the silk, 2 voices, one soft, one sharp, Eleanor and Edward, weaving their lies through the threads again. I whispered back, "No more." I carried the dress to the garden, laid it over the iron brazier, and struck a match. The flame caught the hem, flared blue for a heartbeat, then died. Another match, nothing. The silk refused to burn, and then the wind rose, swirling the smoke around me, and I heard a sound I'd prayed never to hear again. Eleanor's sob. "He promised me forever," she cried, her voice thin as the wind. "You stitched his betrayal into my joy. I tried to protect you," I shouted into the dark. But the dress lifted itself in the breeze like a puppet. The lace writhed, pearls tumbling from the seams, clattering against the stones like tiny bones. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. "Please," I begged, "take your vengeance and leave her. Leave Charlotte, out of it." The fabric shivered once, twice, and then fell limp. The garden went still. I thought it was over, but when I turned, Charlotte was standing in the doorway, pale, barefoot, eyes open but not seeing. The gown now hung from her shoulders, glowing faintly as if sewn from moonlight itself. "Eleanor," I whispered. Her lips curved into a smile that wasn't Charlotte's. "You can't burn what's already part of you, Margaret. I ran to her, tried to tear the silk away, but it clung to her skin like water. She didn't fight me. She simply looked at me with Eleanor's grief and said, "He lied to both of us." The words hit like cold rain, and behind her, just for an instant, I saw Edward again. Not the charming young man I'd loved, but something hollow, eyes dark as the river that took him. He reached out, touching Charlotte's shoulder. The gown shimmered, then burst into light so bright I had to shield my eyes. When it dimmed, Charlotte collapsed into my arms. The silk was gone, nothing left but ashes drifting on the wind. She slept for 2 days. When she woke, she remembered nothing. No dreams, no fever. Only a faint scar across her wrist, where the pearls had once pressed. I buried what remained of the gown at the riverbank, where they'd found Eleanor. The water murmured softly, as if thanking me or warning me. Years have passed since then. Charlotte married, moved away, had children. I never touched a needle again. But sometimes, when rain taps the windows, and I'm sitting here by the fire, I feel a tug at the corner of my sleeve, like a thread being pulled gently, patiently, reminding me that every stitch we make in this life ties us to someone else's story. So if you're still listening, my dear hearts, remember this: never sew with bitterness, never keep love half-spoken, and if ever you find an old dress that glows in the moonlight, walk away. If this story has held your heart tonight, do me a kindness. Tap like so I know you're still here. Subscribe so you'll be with me for the next tale. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It comforts me to know that somewhere, across oceans and time, you're listening to an old woman who once loved too much and learned too late that even silk can bleed. It's strange, you know, how time fades, everything except the things we wish would disappear. The house hasn't changed much, though the paint has cracked and the roses have long given up blooming by the gate. Charlotte's laughter doesn't echo through the hallways anymore. But sometimes, when the wind pushes through the broken panes, I could swear it tries to mimic her voice, soft, uncertain, as though even the air remembers. I'm older now. My hands tremble more than they used to, and the kettle takes longer to boil. The clock in the sitting room stopped years ago. I never wound it again after Edward's photograph slipped from the mantel and shattered. Perhaps some memories are meant to stay broken. It was a Thursday, I remember, when Amelia came. My granddaughter, Charlotte's daughter. She looked just like her mother did when she was young. Same eyes, same kind heart, same unknowing innocence that both warms and frightens me. She'd been living in London, studying fashion design, of all things. When she stepped through the door, suitcase in hand, I nearly dropped my teacup. Her fingers were ink-stained, threads looped around her wrist, a tape measure hanging from her neck like a medal. "Gran," she said with that smile. "I'm designing my first collection, all vintage-inspired, bridal wear mostly. I thought maybe you'd help me with some ideas. You used to sew, didn't you?" I felt the air leave my chest. It was as though the room itself froze. The needle of that stopped clock twitched once, and then settled again. "Oh, my darling," I whispered. "You don't know what you're asking." She laughed, setting her bag on the old sofa. "It's just dresses, Gran. You always talk about beauty and craftsmanship. I want my gowns to feel alive, alive." The word cut through me like a blade. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain was heavy, slapping against the window panes, whispering its old secrets. I sat by the fire and tried not to look at the sewing chest in the corner. It's the same chest, you see. The one that once held the cursed gown. I'd sworn never to open it again, but somehow, I never threw it away. Perhaps I was afraid of what might happen if I did. When I awoke the next morning, Amelia was already in the attic. I heard her calling my name. "Gran! There's something up here you have to see." I climbed the steps slowly, each creak of the wood reminding me of a heartbeat. She was kneeling beside the old chest, open. Dust motes danced around her like tiny spirits. Inside, she'd laid out scraps of yellowed lace, a few loose pearls, and one folded note. The one I'd buried with the remains of the gown decades ago. I remember writing it in a frenzy of guilt, with shaking hands and tear-stained ink. "Gran," Amelia said softly. "What is this?" Her voice trembled with curiosity, not fear. The innocence of a girl untouched by betrayal. I wanted to protect her, to close the chest, and tell her it was nothing. But then, something strange happened. As I reached for the note, the faintest scent of lavender drifted through the attic. The same perfume Eleanor wore on her wedding day. And beneath it, smoke. "Amelia," I said. "Step back," she frowned. "It's just a letter, Gran." But it wasn't. The paper was warm to the touch, as though it had been resting near fire. And there, faint but visible, words began to bleed through the faded ink. Words I never wrote. Promises unstitched will bleed again. I gasped, dropping it. The attic light flickered. Once, twice. Then all went black. When I woke, Amelia was gone. The chest was closed, the room cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. I called her name until my throat burned, but the only reply was the wind brushing through the rafters. I hurried downstairs, and there she was, standing in front of the mirror in the parlor, holding something white against her chest. It was the dress, whole again. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The silk shimmered faintly, as though remembering every tear, every whisper, every betrayal it had absorbed. She looked at me through the reflection and said, "Gran, isn't it beautiful?" I don't even remember bringing it down. Her eyes caught mine in the glass, and for the briefest moment, they weren't hers. They were Eleanor's. I whispered, "Not again. Please, not again." She turned to me, frowning slightly. "What did you say?" "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. It's lovely, dear." But deep inside, I felt it. The curse awakening, threads tightening around another generation. That night, I prayed for forgiveness, for peace, for the strength to end it, once and for all. And if you're still here, my dear ones, listening to an old fool who thought she could bury the past, then don't you dare go anywhere. What happens next will chill your soul. So if you haven't yet, my loves, subscribe and stay close. You won't want to miss what the dawn revealed in that cursed house. That night, I stayed awake in the chair by the fire. The clock that hadn't ticked in 30 years began to move again. Soft, rhythmic, steady. Each tock felt like a reminder that the past refuses to die when you've left pieces of it behind. The house breathed differently now. Doors swelled with unseen humidity. Floors groaned without anyone walking upon them, and the air carried a pulse, a faint vibration, like a heartbeat inside the walls. I watched Amelia as she slept on the couch. Her hair spilled across the cushions, like Charlotte's used to. She'd folded the wedding dress neatly beside her, as if it were a treasure instead of a trap. I wanted to take it, to burn it, to end this nightmare so once and for all. But something held me still. Perhaps fear, perhaps guilt, perhaps both. Around midnight, I heard humming, faint at first, then clearer. It was the same melody Eleanor used to sing while stitching the gown all those years ago. Green Sleeves, that mournful tune that carried both love and regret. I looked toward Amelia, but her lips weren't moving. The voice came from the dress. It rose and fell like a sigh, weaving through the room, curling around the edges of my sanity. I pressed my palms to my ears, but the song seeped through my bones. "Eleanor," I whispered, "what do you want from me?" And then the lamp flickered. The flame stretched tall, bending toward the gown as if drawn by its breath. I could almost see her there, Eleanor's faint silhouette reflected in the glass, standing just behind Amelia, her hand hovering above the girl's shoulder. "You took what was mine," she whispered. "Now, she will carry what you could not." I stumbled forward, clutching the table for balance. "No!" You had your revenge. You ruined me. You ruined Edward. You ruined... She will remember. The whisper cut me off. And when she walks down her aisle, he will watch from the water. The lamp burst, plunging the room into darkness. Amelia screamed. I ran to her, heart pounding, hands shaking. It's all right, darling. It's just a fuse. The power's gone. But then I saw it. The dress. It was no longer folded neatly. It was draped over her, fitting perfectly, though she had never put it on. The fabric shimmered, pearls glinting faintly in the dim light from the fire. Gran, Amelia's voice trembled. I didn't do this. I know, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. I know. I pulled at the seams, but the silk clung like second skin. The more I tried, the more it resisted. The lace along her arms began to tighten, threads digging into her flesh. Stop, she cried. You're hurting me. I froze. The dress loosened again, as if mocking me. Amelia, I said softly, listen to me. Whatever happens, don't look in the mirror. But she already had. Her gaze met her reflection, and the girl in the glass smiled back. Not Amelia's smile. Eleanor's. Do you see me now? The reflection whispered, though Amelia's lips didn't move. Do you see what love cost? Amelia screamed, covering her eyes. I rushed forward and threw the mirror cloth over it. The glass cracked from top to bottom with a sound like shattering bones. The house fell silent again, except for Amelia's sobs and the whisper of rain against the window. I held her close until dawn. When the first light touched her face, she finally slept. Though her skin was cold, her pulse faint. The gown had fallen away sometime in the night, lying beside her in a heap. Pale and still, I thought it was over. I wanted to believe it was. But as the morning sun crept across the floor, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Tiny threads of white silk were woven into Amelia's hair, and beneath her skin, just along the veins of her wrist, a faint shimmer glowed, like the dress breathing beneath her flesh. That's when I knew. The curse hadn't come to claim her. It had come to live through her. And if you're still listening, my dear ones, if your heart hasn't yet given out from fear or sorrow, then stay with me. Because the next night, when I tried to save my granddaughter, I discovered the truth Eleanor never wanted me to speak. So don't go anywhere. Subscribe, my loves. Stay beside me until the end. What's coming next? It isn't just a haunting. It's a confession I've carried for 60 years. You've stayed with me this long, haven't you, my dears? Then you deserve to know the truth. No hauntings begin with curses. They begin with hearts that lied. Long before Eleanor's wedding, I was the seamstress for half the village. I'd sew uniforms for soldiers, christening gowns for infants, shrouds for the departed. My fingers never rested, because stitching gave me purpose. Until Edward Breyer came back from the war. He wasn't meant for me. He was promised to Eleanor Marsh, the baker's gentle daughter. Yet he'd come to my shop for fittings and lingered after hours. He'd laugh, saying the sound of my needle was like rain against a tin roof, honest, soothing. One night, he stayed too long. The lamps burned low, and he told me he wasn't ready for a life of quiet gardens and predictable smiles. I want to feel alive again, Maggie, he whispered. And foolish me, I believed him. We met in secret for months, hidden between bolts of cloth. He said he would tell her. He never did. Instead, on the day he announced the engagement, he asked me to make her gown. It has to be perfect, he said. You're the only one who can. That's how betrayal begins. Not with knives, but with favors that cut deeper. Every stitch I made felt like a confession I couldn't speak. The night before the ceremony, I added one final thread, drawn from a spool my mother left me, said to have belonged to a mourning widow in Devon, who stitched her tears into silk. I didn't believe in curses then. I believed only in pain made tangible. When Eleanor put on the gown, she glowed. Edward's eyes shone, and I thought, he'll never look at me like that again. As she walked past, a single pearl slipped from the hem and landed at my feet. I kept it. I still have it. After the ceremony, they rode to the river for photographs. Hours later, the carriage returned without them. The horse was wild-eyed, soaked, foam on its muzzle. They said the bridge collapsed, that the current took them both. But I knew better. I saw her reflection once more in the water before they found the bodies. She wasn't angry. She was awake. I left the village soon after. I tried to forget, but the gown returned to me a week later, folded neatly on my doorstep, dry as bone, though the river had claimed it. No note, no footprints, just the faint scent of lavender. I burned it then, or thought I did. You already know how that ended. Now, sitting here with Amelia sleeping upstairs, I feel the same pressure in my chest I felt that night. The house hums faintly. The air thickens with her perfume. I know what she wants. She wants me to admit it. So listen, my loves. Lean close, because this is the sin that damned us all. Eleanor was pregnant, not with Edward's child, with mine. He'd come to me the night before their wedding, desperate, terrified. She'd discovered our secret. She begged him to choose. He swore he'd end it after the ceremony, that he'd tell her everything once the vows were spoken, once the scandal couldn't ruin her family. But she never let him. She took the gown, walked to the river, and pulled him in with her. Her final words, neighbors heard them through the storm, were, "Let her sow her own mourning," and I have, ever since. So when you see Amelia designing those bridal gowns, when you hear the hum of the sewing machine at night, remember, it isn't talent that guides her hands. It's inheritance, a thread that began with a lie, passed from my blood into hers. If you've listened this far, bless you. You have no idea how much it matters that someone still hears me. Please, press like if you're still here. Let me know I'm not whispering into the dark. And tell me, my dear ones, where in the world are you hearing this old woman's sins? The world feels less lonely when I imagine your lights flickering in far-off rooms while I speak. But don't leave yet, because when dawn comes, Amelia will wake wearing the dress again, and this time, there will be no river deep enough to hide what rises from its depths. I thought confession might quiet her. It didn't. When I finished whispering the truth to the empty room, the fire sank to embers, and the clock stopped again. Silence pressed against the windows. Not peace, just waiting. Amelia stirred upstairs. Her footsteps crossed the landing, slow and uncertain, as if she were walking through water. I climbed after her, candle trembling in my hand. The stairwell smelled of lavender, always lavender. Her door was open. The moonlight spilled across the bed. And there she sat, upright, eyes half closed, fingers running through the air as though feeling invisible threads. The wedding dress lay across her knees. Its color had changed, no longer white, but the pale gray of river mist. "Gran," she murmured. "Did you hear them?" "Hear who, my love?" "The ones beneath the floorboards. They hum when I breathe." My heart stilled. I wanted to wake her, to shout her name, but the air between us was thick, trembling. Behind her, in the mirror, the candlelight wavered. For an instant, the reflection moved before she did, just a heartbeat early. It smiled. I set the candle down. "Amelia, sweetheart, you're dreaming." She shook her head. "No, I'm remembering." The word remembering sounded wrong in her mouth. Older, as if someone else had borrowed her voice. Outside, rain began again, gentle at first, then steady. It tapped against the window pane in rhythm, with the clock that should have been silent. Tick, tap, tick, tap, 2 hearts beating out of time. I took a step forward. The floor creaked softly beneath me, like wood swelling with moisture. I looked down, water, a thin film, rippling around my shoes. Yet the roof didn't leak. The windows were shut. The water was coming up through the boards, whispering as it rose. I grabbed her arm. "We have to leave." She turned to me slowly, her pupils wide and black. She says you can't run, not when the thread's still tied. Eleanor, please. Let her go. The wind outside grew harsher, rattling the shutters, carrying a low hum that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite words. Then everything stopped. No rain, no ticking, no breath, and from the silence came a voice, mine but younger. I promise, I'll finish the dress myself. The candle went out. I groped in the dark until I found Amelia's hand, cold, still. But there was movement in her wrist, not a pulse, but a tiny twitch, like a thread being drawn through cloth. I followed that invisible pull and found myself back at the old chest. The lid was ajar, though I hadn't touched it in years. Inside, the silk had unwound itself into long ribbons that glimmered faintly even in the dark. They stretched across the room, vanishing beneath the door toward the stairs, toward the river that ran behind the house. I knelt there, wet skirts heavy around me, and whispered, "If I follow, will it end?" From somewhere, perhaps within me, perhaps the water, came a single word, yes. So I gathered the silk in my hands, wrapped it around my wrist, and pulled. The thread tightened, guiding me down the hallway, each step echoing louder than the last, until I reached the back door. It was already open. Mist curled inside like a living thing. The river had risen high, almost level with the garden. Moonlight danced across it, silver and unholy. I could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Faces maybe, memories maybe. Edward's, Eleanor's, mine. All blurred, Amelia's voice drifted from behind me. "Gran, don't go." I turned. She stood in the doorway, drenched in moonlight, the faint shimmer beneath her skin fading now, leaving her eyes her own again. "You have to cut it," I said. "The thread, before it finds you." She nodded, tears running silently down her cheeks. I pressed the scissors, my mother's old sewing shears, into her trembling hands. "I love you," I told her. "That's the only stitch that never unravels." Then I stepped into the water. It was cold, but gentle, like fingers smoothing a wrinkle. The current caught the silk and pulled me farther, the house shrinking behind me, until it was only a lantern in the fog. The thread tightened, then snapped. The sound was small but final, like the closing of a book. The last thing I remember was the scent of lavender turning to salt, and that, my dear ones, is where my story dims. If you're hearing me now, then perhaps Amelia found the courage to finish what I began. Perhaps she's free, or perhaps the thread still hums beneath her pulse, waiting for another bride to take up the needle. If you've listened all the way, bless you. It means you've kept me company through the longest night of my life. So, before you go, touch like, subscribe, so I know you'll come back for the next tale. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It comforts me to imagine the glow of your screen, somewhere far away, while my voice fades with the dawn. I found her voice first, a cassette tape tucked inside the drawer of the old Singer machine, labeled in fading ink, to whoever remembers. The spool had almost decayed, the ribbon curled like old lace, but I cleaned it, threaded it into a borrowed player, and pressed play. "If you're hearing me now," Gran said, "then I'm gone, and that's as it should be. But there's something you must do." Her voice crackled through static, the same gentle lilt that once sang lullabies over cups of tea. I felt the sound vibrate through my chest, like the house itself was breathing her words. "The dress will always find its way back," she continued, "because it was never about the cloth. It was about love twisted into guilt. If you keep it, it will feed on you. If you destroy it, it will only change shape. So listen to me, my darling. Turn it into something new. Make beauty out of it. Sow hope instead of hurt." I paused the tape, wiped my eyes, and looked toward the chest. It was there still, in the corner by the window, patient as a grave. The lid was half open, and the faint scent of lavender still lingered, though I hadn't been near it in months. I lifted the lid. Inside was a single strip of fabric, pale and weightless as breath. No pearls, no shimmer, just soft silk, as though the rest of the gown had dissolved into air. I ran it between my fingers, expecting the chill of river water, but it was warm, alive. I remembered Gran's final words, "Turn it into something new." So I did. I took it to my studio in London, stitched it into the lining of a dress from my new collection. Nothing extravagant, just a simple flowing piece, white as morning fog. I named it the Heirloom. When the model wore it on the runway, something happened. The lights caught the silk just so, and for a heartbeat, I could have sworn I saw her, Gran, standing in the crowd, smiling the way she used to when she was proud, but trying not to cry. Then the lights shifted and she was gone. After the show, I walked home through the drizzle, past the Thames. The river always unsettled me now, though I couldn't say why. As I crossed the bridge, a faint sound reached me, the click of a sewing machine, rhythmic, steady, echoing softly through the mist. I stopped and listened. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the past never leaves. It just changes form, like fabric repurposed into something gentler. I still keep that cassette by my bedside. Sometimes, late at night, I play it again just to hear her voice. Remember, my dear ones, every stitch is a promise. Sew with kindness, and you'll never be haunted by what you've made. Her laughter follows that line. Soft, fragile, real. And if you turn the volume up, right before the tape ends, you can hear the faintest rustle. Like silk brushing against the microphone. A whisper. Not frightening, just tired. Thank you for listening. So if you're hearing this now, you beautiful souls across oceans and time, please don't let old grief thread itself into your joy. If this story found its way to you, maybe it's because you too have something you're ready to forgive. And if you've stayed with me until the end, my loves, press like, share it with someone who sews, and subscribe so her voice can live a little longer in the world. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Gran always said stories travel farther when someone whispers back, because somewhere, beneath the hum of your own house, between the tick of the clock and the hush of the rain, an old woman might still be mending her mistakes, one thread at a time,